I mean, you just, and again, with the cataclysms that we know have happened, the Younger Dryas just being the most recent, but if you go back several 100,000 years, you have these massive, interglacial periods and glacial maximum periods, right? That these cycles that we go through where you have this big glaciation buildup, and then you have just, these what must have been catastrophic floods, and then interglacial periods. In fact, there was a period called the Aeolian period. It was about 120,000 years ago. That was very much like the Holocene that we're in today. In fact, it lasted longer than the Holocene has currently lasted. We've been in the Holocene maybe 10,000 years.
Right from the jump, buckle up. This episode dives straight into catastrophic history, ancient climate cycles, and timelines that'll make your school textbooks look like fiction. Pay attention to how casually they talk about events that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Wild.
10, 11,000 years. I think the Aeolian period was more than 15 to 20,000 years, where it was stable weather. Sea levels were like 3-4 meters higher than where they are today, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't like the height of a glacial maximum where it's a difficult place to live. It was a calm period. I mean, the only reason our civilization is here today is because of the nice weather of the Holocene, right? We have warm weather. We haven't had like massive catastrophes that have been like, extinction level events kind of thing to get in our way and knock us back to the Stone Age. There was a similar period like that lasted longer than we've been in this nice period, about 120,000 years ago. And if you consider after that the cycles of glaciation and flooding, then particularly the Younger Dryas, there'd been just almost nothing left. It's just the stone in places that survived what happened afterwards. So I do like my range of possibilities for, okay, when did these artifacts originate? Like, when did some of this architecture originally be built? It's not, to me, just 15,000 years ago. It could be 100, 200,000 years or even more. And
quick context. Holocene equals the comfortable climate era humans have been chilling in for the last 11,000 years. Basically the Earth's longest good mood. And you're about to hear how fragile that good mood really is.
Again, more contextual evidence to support that is things like the erosion that we can see on some of these sites. One of my favorite topics in the last couple of years has been looking at the erosion on the Giza Plateau.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up.
And of some of the big monuments, in particular, like the whole Middle Pyramid complex on the Giza Plateau.
Let's show some of the images that you used in some of your videos, because it's pretty fascinating when you look at it. It's kind of undeniable.
It is, and what's fun about this is that we don't have to guess, right? We know how long it takes. Studies have been done about like limestone erosion. Turns out there's almost an endless number of conveniently dated limestone slabs all around the world. They're tombstones in cemeteries, right? So they get dated, they get cut, they get inscribed with the date when it was put up. And then so you can measure it, and you can come back over whatever decades and measure erosion. And so how long does it take for this face of this limestone erosion to recede?
This is the nutty stuff.
Yeah, and
because we're assuming that unless something happened to the outside of that this was at one point in time flat and smooth.
100%, because there are still blocks that are protected. So a lot of this has been rebuilt. This is tricky to see. So you can actually see that the less eroded sections are actually modern restorations, because this is so eroded. Use it as
Before
a tourist
the
attraction.
images
like
pop
the Romans
up, here's a mental
to
note.
use as a
Whenever
ceremonial center.
erosion enters the chat, archaeologists either get excited
I agree.
And there's
or
a lot of
extremely
assumptions. You're
defensive.
assuming you knew the form
Watch
of
how
it.
the
You're making your own
conversation
form
hints at a
over the
quiet
sea.
academic
I have a problem. Yes,
war
that was
over
one of my
what
problems
the
with they were
age
talking
of
about
these monuments
restoring the
is.
Middle Pyramid, that it's falling apart.
Right.
And this isn't even the exterior of this structure. This is the interior core masonry. All of this was also, for God knows how many thousands of years, encased in granite.
It also points to a trend. It points to a pattern that when human beings find ancient things, they do renovations to try to keep them. Yeah. Which is one of the things that's been, over and over again. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
There's so many structures that seem like there's multiple timelines working on the same exact ground.
It is 100% a human tendency to renovate and restore all of these, to reuse these sites. It's
even in a gross way, like what they do with the Sphinx. Like the paws, that's gross.
It is. But we're renovating it and restoring it to use it as a tourist attraction. Like the Romans renovated it and restored it to use as a ceremonial center.
But it's a very shitty version. Like the original.
Yeah, I agree.
And there's a lot of assumptions. You're assuming you knew the form of it. You're making your own form over the feet.
I have a problem. Yes, that was one of my problems with they were talking about restoring the middle pyramid, like the third pyramid, like the Menkaure pyramid, the small one.
Yeah.
Small, it's monstrous. But it has these granite casing stones, right? And it lies to the top four. And so
they
are trying to buttress and support things that are going to fall.
Like
I'm all for
restoring
that.
A classic Ferrari with spare parts
there's
from a lawnmower.
Just the amount of erosion that it takes for that to happen to blocks like this.
This tension, preserve
nummulitic
versus
limestone, which is a very hard
is a
form
big
of limestone,
recurring
full of
theme
fossils.
in archaeology.
And 5 courses are still there, but it was at least 15, 16 courses of granite, and there's just all this granite, these massive granite blocks and rubble. And Mustafa Waziri, who was at the time the head of the Department of Antiquities, was talking about, we're going to rebuild it. We're going to put it back together. And I know this, and I'm like, please no, because...
What an asshole.
Well, he did something cool, which was he excavated in front of it. He did show that the courses keep going down. But then he's like, we're going to restore it. I'm like, dude, they would use concrete. It would be a facsimile of what it once was.
Is he still around?
No, he actually, because he said that... there was a lot of international outcry for that very reason. And then, in fact, the government formed a tribunal to figure out what to do. The tribunal was headed by Zahi Hawass, and he lost his job. So,
yeah,
he's not in it. Yeah,
don't restore pyramids,
it's not happening.
bro.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Nobody wants to see the restored pyramid.
I'm
all see what's left.
Yes. Well, we can use our imaginations to... They are restoring a lot of things. I don't necessarily agree with this either. Things that are actively falling apart, sure, you need to buttress them. Like a lot of this wall. So... This is part of the middle pyramid complex at Giza, and there's a lot of blocks like this. There are limestone blocks that are 11, 12 meters long, like 4 meters wide, 200-300 tons, that were stacked up on top of each other, and they eroded so greatly on the inside that they've actually fallen over. At some point in antiquity, they've fallen off, and so they are trying to buttress and support things that are going to fall. I'm all for that, but there's a lot, just the amount of erosion that it takes for that to happen to blocks like this, of this nummulitic limestone, which is a very hard form of limestone, full of fossils. And you're talking like 2-3 feet in some places of erosion of limestone. And if you look at the studies that have been done into like limestone erosion rates, and there's been several, they've studied them in coastal wave action environments where it's like getting battered by waves. They put in rivers. They put limestone cubes on the top of one of the governmental buildings in DC and left there and studied it over decades, and they're like, okay, it's tiny amounts. But in a normal weathering environment, right, this is assuming a lot more rainfall than what happens in Egypt, which gets very little rainfall, by the way, but a place like Washington, DC, or somewhere where you get like 40 inches of rain a year, something like that, it would take... just normal weathering erosion to do 2 feet of erosion like this, more than 100,000.
Pause here. If erosion alone potentially points to an age older than anything mainstream Egyptology accepts, what else does that change? Drop your theories below. Do you lean traditional Egyptology or alternative timelines?
So, and that's, I think you can extend that because if the thing is, maybe there was more rainfall here at some point. We know there was since about 4000 BC. The African humid period was in place. That's another big tell for what happened, particularly on the Giza Plateau and the sites in Egypt. In that, one of the things that's always mystified me about the Sphinx is like it's spent so much time buried in sand up to its chest over the last several thousand years. More time than it hasn't been. We have to work pretty hard to keep the sand out of it now. In fact, there are multiple attempts to dig it out of the sand in the 1800s that failed. And then they just literally 2 or 3 years later, it's sort of buried up to its chest again. Seems like a design flaw. Like, why would you build this thing in a low spot in a windy desert where it's going to fill with sand? It's just, I don't think...
Who's it attributed to again?
Khafra.
That's right. And then wasn't there an inscription where Khafra said that if he could uncover the Sphinx, he would be the pharaoh?
This is right. It's actually Thutmose IV. That's called there's a stele in front of in the chest in there in the Sphinx.
So Thutmose IV.
About 1,000 years later.
He was the one that was saying
right.
He uncovered.
So we knew it was buried in sand during the dynastic Egyptian
That was
civilization.
what I was going to get to.
Yes.
So that during that time, no erosion.
Well, this is a whole so there's a whole other
so it's protected.
Right. So this is another big issue with the wind and sand erosion. When you talk specifically about the Sphinx enclosure, I mean, this is one of the big controversial. I mean,
well, here's the big
academics.
one: the face isn't eroded.
Exactly.
And if it's wind and sand, that's the only thing that's exposed, and that's not as eroded.
It's been one of my major points for a long time. It is, to be fair, the yardang, the sedimentary layers of limestone. It is a slightly harder form of limestone, but still, you're talking thousands and thousands of years where the only thing above the sand level was basically the face. And they explain all of this deep erosion on the body of the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure to wind and sand. I know obviously Robert Schoch is a different interpretation, but yes, you would see erosion on that, but you just don't. I think the most plausible explanation for that Sphinx is that yes, the face was recarved in the dynastic period, probably could have been by Khafra. Well, actually, may well have been before that as well, because there's other evidence that suggests that the Sphinx was already buried in sand at his time. The attribution to Khafra comes from two main sources.
This is basically ancient misattribution law. Just because someone's name is on a stela doesn't mean they built the structure. It might just mean they funded repairs, restored it, or wanted political credit. Think of it as the Egyptian equivalent of a politician slapping their name on a bridge they didn't build.
One is its position. So where the Sphinx is, you have the middle pyramid, you have the causeway that runs down, and you have the middle pyramid, you have the pyramid temple, the complex where we were seeing that erosion. You have this massive causeway that runs down to then the Valley Temple, which is this, very famous, massive megalithic structure. And right next to the Valley Temple is the Sphinx. And in front of that is the Sphinx Temple. So they sort of attribute it and make it, it's part of the Middle Pyramid complex. The other attribution comes from what's been written on that dream stele between in the legs of the Sphinx at its chest. It does say Khafra on there, but there's a lot of it's a controversial statement to say that means Khafra built it. There were several Egyptologists who had different, and this is back in the early 1900s, they had different interpretations for what that said. What they believe it said was Khafra was trying to do what his ancestors had done, had done before, or that Thutmose was trying to do what his ancestors had done before, and Khafra is mentioned there in terms of dig it out of the sand and become king. Like excavate it from the sand.
That's the move that everybody goes through.
Well, it's also, I think it's propaganda. It could be a great explanation for that dream style. It could also just be like governmental propaganda, right? So you could put that in there and say, see, I'm divinely ordained to be king because I dug this out of the sand.
Just in the interest of keeping this standalone, please explain to people the whole deal with Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University and the water erosion.
Yes.
I know, and if you've heard this before, I'm sorry. I just want it for people that are like, what? The water erosion that appears to be thousands of years of rain.
Yeah, it's actually good. It's good background context because it does apply to not only the Sphinx. It's the most famous example, I think, and well-known example of again an adjacent field of science coming in and challenging some of the doctrine that's been around Egyptology. But it was actually Schwaller de Lubitz who originally, I think, proposed it. His work was followed up by John Anthony West, who then brought Dr. Robert Schoch, who's a professor of geology at Boston University, to the Sphinx.
Notice how the untouched walls become the forensic evidence layer in this argument. When you strip away restorations, propaganda, and assumptions, the rocks themselves testify, and their testimony does not match the official timeline.
This was, I believe, the late 80s, early 90s. And he went and looked at the erosional pattern. So the Sphinx sits inside an enclosure. It's carved from bedrock, so it was originally what you would call a yardang, which is like a limestone outcropping. And they cut down in this big enclosure, and they cut the floor, and then they sort of shaped the Sphinx from this natural outcropping of bedrock. So you had, and we know this because the structure next to the Sphinx, or in front of it, called the Sphinx Temple, is actually, you can line up the sedimentary layers of the blocks that are in there from the Sphinx enclosure. So we know that there were blocks taken from here. So this is all predictably sort of cut walls, and the Sphinx would have been nicely finished when it was. And he looked at these patterns. If you go there today, I think I have pictures of the walls of the Sphinx enclosure in there. And it's just these deeply eroded vertical channels. And the Sphinx body's harder to tell because it's been restored so many times. The ancient Egyptians restored it, the Romans restored it, we restored it a couple different times. Yeah. It's fine. But the nice thing is the walls of the enclosure really haven't been touched. So you can see the natural erosive patterns, and he looked at that and went, that's rainfall erosion. But not just some rainfall erosion, literally the result of thousands of years. It's the only way you would get these patterns in the stone is thousands of years of rainfall erosion. Obviously, Giza's a really, really dry. I mean, Egypt's a really dry place these days. You have to go back to time periods pre-4000 BC when the Sahara was a savanna. It was grasslands with lake basins and river systems, and it had a lot more rain. You didn't have this annual flood cycle.
This is the moment the entire theory clicks. If the Sahara was once wet, green, and rainy, then the Sphinx could have been carved long before Egypt became a desert, meaning it might predate the civilization credited with building it.
That you have now, it was like a lot more rainfall. It was much more verdant and green. The Giza Plateau would have been green.
It makes sense that's why they would settle there in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, when they didn't build it in a desert. I mean,
right,
because it would fill up with sand.
It also makes sense why they would flourish, because they had so much resources, because it was like so green and fertile.
Right.
Probably had plenty of plants, plenty of animals.
Well, there's a really other good point associated with that I wanted to bring up. But first, just to finish on the Sphinx erosion. So when Schock came out and said this, he really thought he was moving the story forward, and he took it to an archaeological conference, and they literally laughed him out of the room. And they said, "This is ridiculous. Like, where are the potsherds?" Was I think Mark Lehner's comment, saying, like, "Where's the evidence that something's at least 12,000 years old?" Mocking them. Yeah. So he got a good taste of the old boy network of the archaeologists on that day. But he's being very conservative in that dating also, of saying, well, 12,000 years. It could well be tens of thousands of years. And in fact, it seems more likely to me based on the erosional evidence that we see not only in the Sphinx enclosure, but elsewhere on the Giza Plateau. There's many places where you see just a huge amount of erosion that you can't really explain within the timelines and the climate of dynastic Egypt as we know it from roughly 3000 BC till even now, like, because it's still eroding, right? But